This video will discuss a little bit about the body's energetics. Energetics is the study of the flow of energy and its change from one form to another. Well, we get our energy from the food that we eat. So a little bit about metabolic activity. We've just talked about the digestive system, and the body goes through two stages or states. We have the absorptive state, which is the period of time when the body is actively absorbing nutrients from a meal. So that lasts about 4 hours after each meal. So you eat breakfast, let's say at 7, and then you go through an absorptive state while you're absorbing those nutrients. Then you eat lunch, and for about 4 hours after that, you're going to be absorbing those nutrients. You eat dinner, and for about 4 hours after that, you are absorbing those nutrients. So that's about, if you eat 3 meals a day, you're in the absorptive state for about 12 hours. The hormones involved in this process are going to be insulin. That's going to make your cells ready and open and able to absorb glucose. It's also going to include androgens, estrogens, and growth hormone for how we're going to use that glucose and how we're going to use those nutrients once they are absorbed. The post-absorptive state is when your body is relying on the nutrient pool. So when you're not actively absorbing nutrients. And so roughly this should be about 12 hours per day. If again you eat 3 meals a day, then you have those 4 hours for each meal. So that will be about 12 hours. Here the hormones involved are going to be glucagon, which lowers blood sugar. Glucagon raises blood sugar. It takes glucose and puts it into the bloodstream. Glucocorticoids, epinephrine, growth hormone, all of those are going to be involved in maintaining your blood sugar and utilizing the nutrient pool in the ways that they need to be. Now, once that has been absorbed, what do we do with these nutrients once they're absorbed? Well, this is going to be part of this energetics. And so a calorie defined by lowercase c calorie is defined as the energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Now this little brown bottle here is actually a 2 milliliter bottle, and it can be extrapolated that 1 milliliter of water has the mass of about 1 gram. So we can use milliliters for this discussion as well. But so 1 milliliter, remember this bottle is 2 milliliters, so half of this bottle, this little tiny bottle, the energy it would require to raise that amount of water by 1 degree Celsius is 1 calorie. Well, think about how much water is in your body. That is not, to define or to measure energy usage that's not practical. So we use a kilocalorie, or we use calorie with a capital C. And so that's the energy needed to raise 1 kilogram of water, or in this case, 1,000 milliliters. You can kind of see that in the back, 1,000 milliliters, which is the same thing as 1 liter by 1 degree Celsius. And that is much more practical for using body measurements. And so then the average body requirement would be between 2,000 and 3,000 calories per day. Now, the foods that we eat provide us with different amounts of calories. So carbohydrates, we can get about 4.18 calories per gram. Proteins, you can get 4.32 calories per gram. And lipids, you can get 9.46 calories per gram. Now, if you remember, again, talking about using these types of organic molecules for making ATP, lipids are actually the most efficient, and you can get like 57 ATP molecules from a 6-carbon chain of fatty acids, but you can only get 38 out of a 6-carbon carbohydrate. So that's where this larger number comes from. So how we measure our energy usage is through the basal metabolic rate. And so that is the minimum resting energy expenditure of an awake, alert person. Now we can measure that or monitor that through our respiratory activity. And how we can do that, so if you remember, here's your citric acid cycle, the electron transport system. We take our sugars to convert to pyruvate, go through our citric acid cycle, take those hydrogens, and transfer them over to the electron transport system. And we use oxygen in that process. We get water out, and then as the hydrogens are going through this membrane, we run the ATP enzyme to make ATP synthase. And so we can actually measure the amount of oxygen that's used and the amount of carbon dioxide that is produced, and we can measure how much energy has been used. And we can assume, or we can use the number 4.825 calories are used for each liter of oxygen that's consumed. And so that makes the average basal metabolic rate about 70 calories per hour. Now that does not, this is just an awake, alert person. This is not doing any kind of activity. Another part of this discussion is thermoregulation, how our body maintains how the body maintains its temperature. So even though we're going through all this process of making ATP, and we can make a lot of ATP, only about 40% of the energy in those, the carbohydrate molecules and the protein molecules and so on, actually can be used to make ATP. The rest of that 60% is quote unquote lost as heat. Of course, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It just goes from one form to another. So the other form is heat. So once our body creates this heat, where does it go? And so we have 4 methods of heat transfer. So we can have radiation, evaporation, convection, and conduction. Radiation is when you lose heat to the environment. So the sun radiates heat into our atmosphere. A radiator, the old gas radiators or hot water radiators to heat a home, it would radiate the heat into the room. Well, your body heat radiates out into the environment around you. Evaporation is the water evaporating from your skin. Now, when we create perspiration or sweat all the time. We just don't always feel it or don't feel wet, and so that's called insensible perspiration. And when that evaporates, it's going to cool your skin. Also, the alveolar surfaces of the lungs. When you breathe out, if you want to clean a glass, or if you have glasses and you like that, you'll notice that there's water condensation. Well, every time you breathe in and out, you actually do have some evaporation from the lungs. Convection is another form of heat transfer, and it says due to air currents throughout the body. So the cool air around you is warmed, then warm air rises, and so then cold air moves to take its place, and then that is warmed, rises, cool air takes its place, and so that creates air currents around the body. And you may have heard of a convection oven, and that's kind of how that process works as well. It's moving the air around in the oven. And the fourth kind is called conduction, and that is transfer of heat through direct contact. So example, you sit in a seat and it's cold, eventually it'll warm up because your body heat went to the chair. That's the same thing, you hold somebody's hand, they're cold, your body heat will warm up their hands, and so on. So these are methods of heat transfer. And so we can see this lady here, radiation, her body heat is radiating into the atmosphere. Her sweat would be evaporating to cool her off. This fan here is blowing cool air over her heated skin, and so it's taking the heat with it. And then direct contact, conduction with the floor. Now your body's normal range, normal body temperature is about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if we lose that ability to maintain our body temperature, death can occur at either end, whether you get too cold or too hot. And your body is actually much better at dealing with high temperatures and getting rid of heat, that we talked about those four methods of heat transfer, than it does with colder temperatures. And your hypothalamus is where these heat controlling centers are located. So here we can see, here's your normal normal temperature range, about 98.6. Here are some conditions, like if somebody has a fever or you're just active exercise. Unfortunately, if you get heat stroke, you might be up towards 110. Central nervous system damage might pull you up towards 114. In the cold morning, so example here, when your temperature is lower, you have cold mornings, severe exposure, or you could have a medically induced hypothermia. Well, over here, you notice this is the normal range, and your body is effective at controlling your body temperature up to about 106. After that, your body becomes impaired and then severely impaired. But as soon as you get past this about, let's say, 96 degrees, then your body's our impaired ability to maintain your body temperature, and then we have severe, and then by the time you get too cold, your body temperature has dropped so low you cannot control it at all. And so you notice death is here at the bottom and at the top. So here said the hypothalamus, so we have a heat loss center and a heat gain center. So the heat loss center is activated when you get hot so that it will you will lose heat. And you can do that a couple ways. One is through behavioral changes. If you're hot, like in the summer, if you're in the sun, well, go in the shade, get a drink of cold water, so things like that. Your blood vessels are going to dilate, get bigger. That means that more blood is going to go to the surface of the skin, like you might look red, and so then more heat can be lost through radiation and convection. You're going to start producing more sweat so that more is evaporated, and then you'll lose that heat through evaporation. Also, your respiratory centers are going to be activated. You're going to increase your depth of respiration, and you're going to start breathing through the mouth instead of the nose so that you increase your evaporation from the lungs. If you want to do heat, if you want to gain heat, you can do it two ways. We can either make more heat through shivering or non-shivering, or we can conserve the heat that we already have. To generate more heat is through non-shivering thermogenesis. That involves the release of hormones that are going to increase metabolic activity. And metabolic activity is making ATP. Well, 60% of that energy is lost as heat, so that would get you warmer. In shivering, of course, you're going to use your muscles. Shivering is actually contraction of muscles, both an agonist and antagonist. So example, like your biceps brachii and your triceps brachii contracting alternately. If you get get cold and you want to keep the heat that you already have, you want to conserve the heat, you do that through two things. One, your vasomotor center is in your brain is going to be activated, and here you're going to have vasoconstriction, and blood is going to be taken away from the skin and moved towards the trunk. Also think about the places where you get frostbite, your fingers and toes, the tips of your ears, the tips of your nose. Your body is going to take blood away from those places, take them towards the vital organs. We also have what's called countercurrent exchange. So here are two blood vessels. Here is an artery bringing warm blood from the trunk, and let's say it's going towards the hands. But then once when they get to the hands, it gets cold, and so then the blood is going back to the trunk. But since the warmer blood is going away, heat actually goes from the arteries towards the veins, and we have heat transfer.